and I would like to welcome you to The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a new viewer, I'm so glad you found your way to my little corner of the internet, and if you're a returning viewer, it's so nice to see you again. I know that it's been a while, circumstances have conspired to keep me away from you, but the good news is that means I have a lot of finished objects and other things to show you. In fact, I have so many that I'm going to split it up, so I'm only going to talk about half of everything today, and I think that that will still be quite a full episode. So other than talking about finished objects and a work in progress, I will just address a topic today, and that is gift knitting, because December is almost here, and that means holiday knitting in my world, and probably in a lot of yours as well. So let's get started. I'm sorry if you can hear drinking noises. The pets have been happily napping, and now that I'm recording, they've decided it's time to get a drink. Oh, also I'm using a new lens today. Not a new to me lens, just a different lens that I usually use. And I've got a different focus setup going on. And I'm really hoping that it'll work, because having to do manual focus gets really frustrating. I can't always tell if it's in focus or not until I upload it, and then I lose whole episodes, and it makes me not want to podcast. So let me know what's going on with the visual quality today, and as long as it doesn't give you any headaches, then that is what we're going to do in the future. So, first up is a test knit, and it is also a Christmas present. Oh, I love it so much. So this is a test knit for Kyla of Arctos Knits. I will let you know when the pattern goes live. I think this is my third test knit from her, and I've never test knit before, but first of all, I'm just online knitting buddies with her. She has a podcast as well, and we both really enjoy kind of making up our own things. And also she does a lot of botanical inspired knits, or just, I guess, natural history type knits, so I cannot resist that. And when I saw that she was looking for test knitters for this pattern, I realized it would be absolutely perfect for a friend of mine who is really into feathers. She collects feathers, and she got a couple shadow boxes to display her feathers. So the pattern called for DK weight yarn, knitting up at a gauge of, I think, 6 stitches to the inch. And I wanted to knit it from stash so that I could go ahead and get it knit quickly. But I don't actually have a lot of sport DK yarn. So what I ended up using, the red is Beaver Slide Sport, which is, I think, 80% merino, 20% kid mohair. It's all made in the US, and this is the chokeberry heather colorway, I think. This is the yarn from the very first sweater that I ever knit, and it turns out I can't wear mohair on my arms, so I have rehomed that sweater, but I still really love this yarn. It's a woolen spun yarn, so I thought it would look really nice in color work. And then for the contrast color, I went with Knit Picks Reverie, which is a now discontinued 100% baby alpaca, but it's like brushed baby alpaca. And technically it's a worsted weight, I think, because it's fluffy. They categorized it as worsted, but the actual yarn is very thin, so I knew that it would be easy to get the stitch. And I thought that, yeah, this color combination would look really nice. We'll go ahead and show you what it looks like on my head. So it's a slouchy type beanie. And the other reason why I chose the baby alpaca is because I figured between the baby alpaca and the kid mohair content, it's in this ribbing pretty, of the burgundy yarn, and like how nice and long it is, and how it's stranded knitting, so it's going to be a really warm hat, and I really wanted that for her. She's the same friend who I knit a stranded colorwork hat for last year for Christmas, and that one's a little lighter weight, so this is like a blizzard hat, really. Which, considering we've been having snow all month, and we live in western New York, so we get a lot of lake effect snow, that a blizzard hat is a useful thing. So yeah, I've blocked this, and I'm really, really delighted with it. I feel like this would be a perfect Ravenclaw hat if you knit it in navy and gold, or bronze, if you're true to the books, and silver, I think, is what they used in the movies. I have not seen all the movies. Anyway, but yeah. And obviously I knit it to pattern because it was a test knit, and it was really fun. I actually expected the charts to have a lot more long strands, just because it's so pretty and it's not like a small pattern the way that kind of Fair Isle color work is.
but actually, once you get into the feathers, you very rarely have to catch your strand. Sorry, I'm like weirdly leaning back. I don't know why. Anyway, so yeah, this is a real pleasure to knit. It only took a couple of days, and I had a great time doing it. So I will definitely let you know when the pattern comes out. Next up is a little gnome. I have 5 of these on my Christmas knitting wish list, to knit list, and this is the first one. So this is for my boyfriend's brother Kyle. I will be knitting a gnome for another Kyle as well. That's why I need to clarify. And Joel said that his favorite color was blue, so I went through my scraps and grabbed a couple blues. I thought I had enough of this left over to knit the body, but I ran out, so the bottom is the hat color, and that's also why the arms are the hat color. But yeah, I always love the way that the gnomes turn out. This is from the Never Not Gnoming pattern by Imagined Landscapes, and the only modification I make is I did this accidentally a few gnomes ago, and now I just do it all the time. I knit the body to be shorter, so I do one less plain round in between the increases, because I find that the gnome still looks cute and it's less knitting time. Even with that modification, it took me 5 episodes of Hilda, which is about 2 hours from start to finish to make one of these. So just to give you some context, since I'll be talking about gift knitting later, it's because they're knit out of fingering weight yarn. But yeah, so they're a really good way to use up scraps, and I just think that they're really fun gifts to give. So. Moth is making a lot of cameos today. Sorry about the abrupt transition. There was a mild pet crisis, so I had to deal with that. But now I'm back, and I've got another gift knit, but you've seen these ones before. These are the Sunshine socks. They're for my mom. They're not a Christmas gift. I just owe her a few pairs of socks. So yeah, I'm making good on that debt. And the stripe yarn is Knit Picks Felici in Boy, maybe? I can't remember the color name, but it's on the project page in case you're interested. It's a really pretty combination. And then the contrast yarn is also Knit Picks. It's their Comfy Fingering, which is a cotton acrylic blend. And that one is in Sea Breeze, something like that. It's been a while since I knit these. And you can tell that they don't match. And you might especially notice that the very top stripes don't follow the rest of the pattern. So I had one 50-gram skein of the Felici, and when I ordered that yarn, my mom preferred short socks, and my mom has quite small feet. She wears a size US 5.5, which I think is like a 34 European. I don't know what it is in the UK. But, and so 50 grams plus contrast heels, toes, and cuffs, which I prefer to do on self-striping anyway, easily makes a normal sock, and at the time she preferred short socks. But in the meantime, since I took a while to start knitting these, she now prefers long socks. She likes to wear them under her trousers in the winter, and so she likes them to go further up her calf. So I was really trying to maximize my yarn here and make sure that I could get these as long as possible. So I had used the Comfy Fingering as the contrast color in a different pair of socks, but I really wanted to use up what I had left of that one, and then I also wanted to use up all of the Felici. So what I did was first I knit this sock up to here, and I measured the yarn, and I had a little more than half left over, but if I had knit one more stripe, then when I started this sock, these two colors would have been next to each other, and I didn't think that would look good. So then I started the second sock, and I knit up to here, and I had 3 stripes of yarn left. So I was like, okay, I can add 1 to each sock. But I couldn't, the stripe colors that were left, it didn't match the patterning, and the third stripe that was left was this one, which I didn't really want near the contrast either. So that's how I ended up with an extra gray stripe on this one and an extra yellow stripe on this one. I think they still look cute though. Obviously, that was 4 more ends to weave in. There were a lot of ends to weave in on these socks for like an inch more of sock length, which I wouldn't have done for myself, but my mom, she deserves socks as long as she can get them.
So then I had what was left of the comfy fingering, and I just went ahead and knit each of the cuffs. I knit the first cuff until I was around the halfway point for my leftover yarn, and then I knit the second cuff. So just 2x2 ribbing. And I did a fish lips kiss heel. And I talk a lot about short row heels, I think last episode, maybe one before. And then I did a short row toe as well, which means that you provisionally cast on half the stitches and then you work the toe shape flat using short rows, which I much prefer to having to have like 12 stitches on 4 DPNs. And yeah, the texture is from the Hermione Everyday Sock pattern, which is a very popular free pattern on Ravelry. All I used was the texture, but I love how they turned out, and I think that my mother will really like them too. So I already texted her a photo, and she's excited about them. So not Christmas knitting, but still gift knitting. The reason why I owe her those socks is that she bought the yarn, not me. And she also bought yarn for my aunt to have a pair of striped socks. I'll have to work on those soon. Oh, come on, focus. There we go. Let's see. Okay, one finished object left, and that is my witching hour cardigan, which I am wearing. I will go ahead and insert Maud Lily photos here so that I don't have to try to stand up or anything. But this is knit out of Quince & Company Turn, which is their 70% wool, 30% silk. It's either 70-30 or 80-20. Made in the US, that kind of thing. Fingering weight yarn. It is a fingering weight as far as yardage goes. You get 220 yards to 50 grams. But honestly, I knit it at a sport weight gauge. If I try to knit it, like it's a plump fingering, and if I try to knit it at 7 to 8 stitches to the inch, it just feels too tight. So I tend to knit it between like around 6.5 stitches to the inch. The colorway is Basalt. A viewer kindly on Instagram told me that that is how you say it in America. And apparently in Britain it's basalt. So it's a rock. It's a very pretty gray color. And I designed it myself. So the stitch pattern is the Candle Flame stitch pattern from Barbara Walker's First Treasury of Knitted Stitches. You can find a link to the stitch pattern on the project page if you're interested. And I used, I think, around 230 grams of yarn. I went with 3/4 length sleeves because I have found that that makes sweaters much more wearable for me indoors. I only just started knitting shorter sleeve lengths this year. I knit a blue sweater in the spring that I didn't have enough yarn to knit full length sleeves. And I found that I wore that one so much. And so then I started knitting more sweaters with 3/4 length sleeves. And then there were about 2 weeks when we were transitioning into fall when suddenly I wanted long sleeves again. And so I was like, maybe I'll, start knitting long sleeve sweaters again. But then central heating kicked on, and now I'm back to preferring 3/4 length sleeves. So I think going forward, I'm mainly going to knit that length sleeve, especially since I already have some full length sleeves for the very short transitional period here. And because of that, the other nice thing about that is that means I still only need 5 skeins or 250 grams of fingering weight yarn to knit a sweater, even though I'm now knitting for around a 35-inch bust instead of a 33-inch bust. So save some money. And let's talk details about this sweater. I honestly cannot remember what I've talked about and what I haven't because it's been so long. But I'm sure that I haven't talked about the sleeves because I had not knit those last time. So the same way that I've been I was experimenting with fit in the body of sweaters earlier in the fall, and now I think that I've really got that down. I really like how this one fits. I can go ahead and button it up for you. I'm now experimenting with sleeve fit because I am not as used to the shorter sleeve length, and so I'm not always sure what measurements I want at the cuff and how quickly I should do my increases and that sort of thing. So I did have to frog quite a bit of the first sleeve because it was just too big. It was very baggy.
And so this still has enough positive ease that I can easily layer it over this dress, which has cap sleeves, but I think it's just on the edge of not looking baggy. It still might be a little too much, but I think that in movement, then it's fine. And I really like this length too. A couple of the ones I knit so that when I bend my elbow, they go to about here, and that feels a little short. Whereas, and I think that that's partly a factor of having more positive ease in the sleeve means that I can move my arms more without the sleeve shortening, which is really nice. So, and I enjoy knitting sleeves, especially when they're just plain stockinette in the round, so I didn't mind having to rip back for that. And I went ahead and did a seamed in sleeve cap, as usual, because that is my favorite way to make sweaters, as well as my favorite sweater type to wear. I didn't go down a needle size for the neckband, and I kind of wish I did, because although I like the width of the neckband, it is kind of, this is my shoulder line, so it's not too wide, but it's very close. I would like it to sit about here instead, which you can tell I haven't recorded in a while. I forgot to keep an eye on how long I'd been talking for. So I was talking about the neckband and how the consequence of not going down a needle size means that it's a wider, and so that means that the shoulder sits a little more out. And while it does fit me, because this is the edge of my shoulder, I usually like it to sit here, which I could have done by just going down a needle size, but I did not do that because I think I was working on this over at Joel's and I didn't have another needle, or maybe I just didn't want to get off the couch. That is definitely a possibility. But I still really like it, and you can see how nicely the button band fits. I don't think I actually took photos of it all the way buttoned up, but the button band, it doesn't wave or anything. Here, I'll pop up a little bit. I have a bow in my dress, that's why there's a gap. But that gives you an idea, because that was at the widest part. I am so awkward. Oh, the things I do for knitting. So what I wanted to talk about with the button band was my newest little addition, is to crochet a single, like I just single crochet across the tops and the bottoms of both sides of the button bands. And I find that that lets it sit really nice and level, because in order for a button band to not wave, I have to knit it quite snugly. Before I blocked this, it curled like this because it looked like the button band was too small for the body. But once I blocked it, it sits just right. If you knit a button band too long, then there's extra length when you button it and you get that wavy effect, and I do not care for that on my sweaters. And so knitting a shorter button band works really well to prevent the waves, but it does mean that at the top and the bottom, usually it doesn't sit straight because the button band wants to shrink a little, right? And so since crocheting creates a much more stable fabric, then just adding this little row of single crochets seems to kind of make it immune to that kind of thing. And so even if the button band wants to tug in a little, the single crochets keep it looking really nice and level. And all I do is I make sure that I leave extra long yarn ends when I'm picking up the stitches for the button band and then when I'm binding off. And that way I can just go ahead and crochet across, and it doesn't require any more ends to weave in than it would otherwise. So I started that with my blue sweater, my blue cotton cardigan, because I accidentally did the buttonhole too high up here, so I wanted to add a little length to make it look a little more balanced. And then I realized how well it was behaving, so I definitely plan to do that on all future sweaters. I do plan an episode soon where I talk all about button bands, since they're like a mini interest of mine within the interest of knitting. So yeah. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I went ahead and measured how much yarn I was using for the different pieces, just so that I would have that for reference when I'm trying to plan multicolored sweaters or trying to figure out yarn chicken, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, it's on my project page. I think each sleeve was 39 grams. Each front was less than a sleeve, not maybe 31, somewhere around there. And then I think the back was around 80 grams. Does that all add up? I don't know. And then, here, let me just open that up since you might not want to go. to the Ravelry project page, but you might be interested in your newsletter. So as I said, this is 220 yards to 50 grams, and I knit it at about 6.5 stitches to the inch. Whoops. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, the back was 74 grams. Each front weighed 31. The sleeve weighed 39. The neckband took 6 grams, and the bands together took 8. So, I really love this sweater. It's the first solid gray sweater that I've knit. I did knit my cherry blossom sweater, is mainly gray, but it's really nice to have such a useful neutral sweater. And I love how this stitch pattern wears and how it looks, and the silk in the yarn just makes it so nice and drapey. I actually have ordered yarn for another gray sweater because I realized just how useful they are. The reason why I hadn't knit them before is because before I became a knitter, I thrifted most of my clothing. So I had, and gray has been one of my favorite neutrals for quite a while, so I had several thrifted wool sweaters. So it seemed like I should be knitting sweaters in other colors first, which is why I have several taupe sweaters now. But last winter I noticed that I no longer reach for my thrifted cardigans. I only want to wear my hand knit cardigans because they're cropped and they fit better with my style, and so then it became a much more urgent. I kept wanting, like, reaching for a gray cardigan that didn't exist in the drawer. So yeah, really pleased with how that turned out. And I really like, I think, knitting for around a 35-inch cardigan. Honestly, I haven't measured the finished sweater, so I don't know how close I came to that, but I think at my current weight that gives me either, it might be 0 ease, although this is a very stretchy stitch pattern, but it might also be maybe ½ an inch of positive ease, and I really like how that feels. I still have negative ease in the waist because I like that very fitted waist silhouette, since I like to wear poofy skirts. But yeah, before I knit my sweaters to be snugger in the bust, thinking that that would make me look bustier, but I think it actually kind of smooshed things down. I said I will make a complete fool of myself if we're talking about knitting. So yeah, lesson learned. I should be making sure I have some ease in that area. I really love this sweater. I'm so happy with how it turned out. And I finished it in time for my trip to Boston, which was my goal, so I got to wear it while sightseeing, which is always fun. Tern is one of my very favorite sweater yarns. If I could only knit with 2 yarns for sweaters, I would pick Tern and then Elsa Wool Cormo. They're woolen spun in probably the lace weight, which is actually a light fingering. So those are my 2 favorites, but I really love Tern. It has gotten a little more expensive. When I started knitting, I think it was $9.50 a skein, and now it's $11 a skein. Maybe it was $9, I don't know. Which isn't that much per skein, but it does mean that for a sweater's quantity, it used to be just under $50, and now it's over. But it's still worth it, and Quince & Company is a very transparent, ethical yarn manufacturing company, and I'm sure that their employees like having raises every year. So I understand why the price of the yarn has gone up. And I think that it's definitely worth it because I wear my Quince Tern sweaters like so often. They're pretty much the backbone of my wardrobe for my hand knits. Okay, so go ahead and share my work in progress, which is more gift knitting. So I am knitting mittens for Joel's mom, Vicki. And I finished the first one, and I'm on to the second one. So these are worsted weight mittens. Oh, I really love how they turned out. Joel picked the colors. They're both Knit Pick Swish worsted, which is a superwash merino, 110 yards to 50 grams. And the black is just called black. And then this is the Squirrel Heather colorway. So it's more of a taupe than a gray. And as I said, I had Joel pick out the colors because it's his mom. And I was kind of teasing him when he picked the colors out because I also had him pick out colors for a hat for his sort of stepdad, and he only picked 2 neutrals. But I have to admit, seeing this knit up, it looks very, very classy, so I will stop teasing him. I have done the thumb. I'm going to convert it to be, well, I'm going to make it a convertible mitten. So this is the yarn that I will take out and knit the flaps. I have a video tutorial about how that works if you want to see it. And then I'm also going to add the conductive thread to the thumb. And I'm using the Herringbone mitten pattern, which is a free pattern on Ravelry. I love how these are knitting up, and once you kind of crack the code of the chart, it's really, really intuitive. So, and you never are carrying your yarn for very far. I really love how that seam looks. So I think this would be a great first color work project. However, the sizing is a little iffy. So, oh, and before I get into that, so the chart every other round is just knit 2 of each color. So that's really easy to remember. And then the alternate rounds, they have different starts here, so I do have to look at the chart to know where to start. But after that, it's basically a repeat of 4. It's BBAB and then AABA. It's a free pattern. And so I can just count to 4 in my head over and over. And so that means that once I remembered that, I've knit these one other time, but it was several years ago. But once I remembered that, I could knit these while reading, which was really nice. So a lovely intuitive knit, and I cannot wait, in addition to still needing to make it convertible, I'm going to do, the pattern suggests there's an eyelet row here, and so I'm going to thread yarn through there and do a pom-pom, or maybe 2 pom-poms, 2 little pom-poms for the cuff, which I think, especially in the neutral yarn, will just add a really nice touch of whimsy, but still keep it classy looking. And I'm not sure if Vicki's, I've got fairly small hands for a woman, and so these fit me, but they do have enough room that if it needs to be a women's medium, like I knit the thumb, this is where my thumb ends. I knit the thumb a little longer. I've got pretty short, my thumb and pinky are quite short. So I wanted to make sure that this would fit a women's medium as well, just because I'm not sure of her hand size. Yeah, so... Oh, so modifications. I knit this ribbed cuff part a lot longer. I added 8 extra rounds, but then I did the thumb more quickly. So, and the reason why I did that was, first, I just really like having a long ribbed cuff. I think it helps the mitten stay on better. But secondly, if I had waited to split for the thumb until where the chart said, I don't think this part would have been long enough. So by splitting for the thumb earlier, that just makes, you know, the hand part longer. And the chart has a gusseted thumb, but in worsted weight mittens, I really like I think it's called a peasant thumb or an afterthought thumb. So the same way that there's yarn here to make it convertible, all I do is put yarn where I want my thumb to be, and then once I've knit the whole mitten, I go back and add the thumb. And I like how it helps line up the pattern. So I did do a different thumb, and I just continued the herringbone stitch on the thumb instead of, the pattern has it pinstriped, which I also like, but figured why not just have it blend in with the palm, because that always looks fun. And all of the details for how I changed everything is on the project page in case you're interested. So I put this in at round 16, and then I put the convertible bit in at round 31, which hopefully is the right length. The process of converting is a little fiddly, but easy, just time-consuming fiddliness once you know what you're doing, but I don't always get this in the right spot. A couple of my mittens, it goes down too far, so I wanted to make sure that was in the right spot for these. I was all the way up to here on this mitten, and I realized that I'd messed up the first few rounds because I was trying to read while knitting it before I had figured out the code to the chart. And I hadn't used the little highlight bar in my app, so I had gotten confused, and it did not look good, so I had to rip the whole thing back to start over again. But at least at that point I knew the chart. Oh, apologies. So I could just go ahead and knit it while reading, and it feels very rhythmic, and yeah, so I really love it. And as I said, it's a great simple colorwork pattern that it makes it very easy for you to keep track of your tension, and because there are such short floats, it means that nothing's going to get caught on your hand. And I think it actually looks really great on the inside too with the chevron pattern. So I'm knitting these out of Swish worsted because Joel was saying that his mom will probably want to wash her mittens every once in a while, which makes sense. I wash mine every once in a while too. And whenever I'm knitting gift knits for people, unless I know that they hand wash things, if it needs to be washed at all, then I'll go ahead and do a superwash yarn. I thought about doing the superwash wool, the Andes, which would be a sturdier mitten yarn, but I don't know how sensitive Vicki is to wool. And, you know, they're a gift. You want them to feel snuggly. So this is definitely a very snuggly superwash merino. And I would use it to knit more gifts. I'm pretty impressed by it. It's knitting up really nicely at this gauge, which I don't know. I think the pattern calls for 6 stitches to the inch. Mine might be a little snugger. Since it's superwash, I wanted to err on the side of snug since it can probably stretch out. Yeah, so I suspect I will be done with most of this today. I don't know if I'll have done the convertible bit though. So really happy with how that is turning out. So Megan cleverly suggested that I talk about gift knitting, and I'm going to go ahead and do that now. She was particularly interested in if there are any particular patterns that I use for gift knitting. So one of the categories that I like to use are little softies, and I use 2 patterns. This year it's been the gnomes. I've knit quite a few little gift gnomes because they're so cute and they're scrappy, so that's useful. The other ones that I did last year are wee woodland wuzzies, which are tiny little woodland creatures. I have one that I've managed to save and keep in my apartment, and they're about the same size as the gnome, but they're knit with worsted weight, and so they only take about 45 minutes instead of 2 hours. And the pattern gives you several varieties, and once you have knit a few, it's really easy to make variations. So I've knit people ones that are like custom pets, which is really fun, and people seem to really enjoy that. So the upside of the animals is that they knit more quickly, and the upside of the gnomes is that they don't require safety eyes, which I just ordered a whole bunch of the little safety eyes so that it's easy for me to make those little animals whenever I want to, but I really don't like having to shove the back of the safety eye on. I find it a very cumbersome process, but it doesn't take me an extra hour compared to knitting the gnomes. So those are the 2 softy patterns that I've had the most success with and knit multiple times. I have definitely gifted people other softies, and I find that one of the keys for that is to use safety eyes. I don't use it if I'm knitting for a baby, but that doesn't happen very often. And when I've done that, I've just embroidered a sleeping face on, because anytime I try to embroider actual eyes, they end up looking vaguely evil. I think you really need that glint, like, because safety eyes are plastic, they catch the light, so they look alive. But that, obviously, that's a personal preference thing. Oh, I've also knit, as far as designers, I've knit a lot of Sarah Elizabeth Kellner's patterns. She has quite realistic animals, mainly common North American animals, and so my niece is a big fan of realistic softies, so I've knit a lot of those, and I've also knit her songbird for my birding friend, so that those always go over well. Other than that, this is my second time knitting the herringbone mitten pattern, as I said, but usually I don't tend to repeat the same patterns just because I enjoy knitting a variety of things, and so I'd rather try new patterns, especially since there are so many free ones available on Ravelry. Oh, as far as sock patterns, I've definitely repeated those. I've knit the blueberry waffle sock multiple times. I've knit the Hermione's everyday sock multiple times as well. So, and those have gone over well. And then one pattern that I just happen to have knit several times are the spider socks. I knit a pair for me, and then my friend Debbie wanted a pair, and then my niece Kylie wanted them as fingerless mitts, so I adapted them for that. And then this Christmas I'm going to knit another pair of them for Debbie's husband Rich, who is also my friend and was jealous of her spider socks last Christmas. So that might just be because of me and my family. I know not everyone is fond of spiders, my friends and family, but that one has proven quite popular as well. So now I'm going to just talk about kind of general gift knitting suggestions. So I have found that color work and cables have a lot of visual impact,
And so if I know that I want to knit something for someone but I don't know anything else, then I usually decide to go with one of those two options because especially color work, but even cables, because you're not usually cabling every round, like not the twisted stitch type cables, the bigger cables. They tend to still knit up fairly quickly, and they have that wow factor, which is really nice. So I tend to go for that. I prefer to use worsted weight when I'm knitting gifts, if it makes sense in the context of the gift recipient, just because also that makes it go a little more quickly, and I tend to mainly knit fingering weight objects for myself. And I like to alternate between yarn weights when I'm knitting because that helps me knit more. I have chronic illnesses for any new viewers, and so knitting can cause me pain, so I'm always looking for kind of ways to manage that pain while still letting me knit. And one of the ways I do that is alternating kind of needle size and yarn weight. So I definitely am, if in doubt, I'm going to go for a worsted weight project over a fingering weight one as a gift. I really love knitting hats. They're one of my favorite things to knit, and I own so many hats at this point that I try not to knit too many for myself. So that's why I really love getting to knit hats for others for gifts. So I've got a couple hats on my Christmas knitting list this year. So that's definitely my first preference. Then I don't mind knitting mittens, especially at worsted weight. I'm not a huge fan of having to go back and add the thumbs and then make them convertible. Those would be why I prefer knitting hats versus mittens, but that's still not a huge deal. And so I enjoy knitting mittens and gifts as well, especially adding the thread that makes it work with a smartphone. I find that is also gets a lot of wow reactions from the recipients. And I went ahead and bought 2 spools of that conductive thread off Amazon maybe 2 or 3 years ago for $8, and I haven't even had to start using the second spool yet. A little bit goes a very long way. So I just always keep those on hand. Let's see. I do knit socks for people. Obviously, those are a fingering weight project. So those take a little longer, but I love knitting socks. So if I'm making a big Christmas list, I'm not going to put a lot of socks on there, but if I'm knitting things for people for their birthday or Mother's Day or that kind of thing, if I know that they like hand knit socks, I'm happy to knit them a pair. When I'm knitting socks for people, I definitely will choose a pattern with a lot of ribbing if I'm not sure about fit. So I have a chart from Sensational Knitted Socks that takes shoe sizes and tells me the general sizes that the sock should be, so I find that really useful because then I can just ask someone their shoe size instead of getting a lot of measurements. But just to be on the safe side, I definitely prefer sock patterns with ribbing in them when I'm gift knitting until I know their feet better, and I will usually do a heel flap and gusset because I think that fits people's feet without modifications better than a short row heel. The exception is if I'm using like a self-striping yarn or a variegated yarn. I have knit stranded socks for people, but only my mom and my friend Debbie, and I had to get so many foot measurements first just to make sure, because when you're making a stranded fabric, it's not stretchy in the same way. So I would not do colorwork socks all over colorwork socks. I think a little colorwork, especially right at the toe, so you don't even have to worry about it getting over the instep, is fine, but all over colorwork socks are a tricky fit. In general, if I'm not sure about fit, then I'll choose ribbing, like for hats as well, just because then you know that it's going to work for variety. As far as what yarn I use, I already mentioned that if it's something that I know will need to be washable, I tend to default towards superwash, even though it's not something that I use much when in my personal knitting, just because I'm not that like I can wear things like this yarn without any problems, and so I'd rather buy the less processed yarn if it works for me. But obviously I don't want to give someone a gift that itches them and then they're wearing it out of obligation and they're not really enjoying it, and that's kind of a rough situation. I also don't want them to feel precious about it, so I find that in those contexts superwash can be a better choice. Let's see, what else? I definitely like to customize the gifts for people. So I like to think about their favorite colors or think about their activities and what climates they live in and that kind of thing, which is why my family, which are mainly in South Texas, tend to get things that are more in plant fibers or lighter weight wools versus heavyweight wools. I also take two different approaches to gift knitting. Sometimes I want it to be a surprise, like Joel's mom's mittens. Those will be a surprise, so that's why I asked him about colors and not her. But a lot of times, unless I have a really good idea, like I see a pattern like the feather pattern that I know my friend Christy will love, I would rather just ask the recipient because to me a lot of the pleasure of knitting comes from being able to customize things just for my taste. And so I like to be able to pass that along to others. So for instance, my sister has requested, oh, that's the other pattern that I've knit multiple times, the Star Shower Cowl. I've knit it in both fingering weight and adapted it for DK as gift knits. And that one's gone over really well as well. And that's a quite quick knit, and it doesn't use a lot of yardage, so it's not very expensive. Which is the other advantage of hats and mittens, too. A lot of times you can use just 100 grams of yarn, especially with hats. With mittens, it can get tricky if you want to make them convertible, because then you need more yarn for the inner cuff. But just plain mittens are going to be 100 grams of yarn as well. So affordability-wise, that's nice. But as I was saying, I really like letting people customize their own patterns. So my sister has requested another Star Shower Cowl. This will be her third. She really likes that pattern, and she wanted it in burgundy this year. So I sent her a few like yarn images, and then she picked one out, and that'll be really fun. That's for her birthday, not Christmas, but her birthday's in February, so you'll still see me working on it soon. Or my friend Kristen, she really liked these elephant fingerless mitts. And so I went ahead and asked her what color she would like them in, just to make sure that we're kind of on the same page, because, I mean, why not? So I do enjoy taking both approaches to gift knitting. For example, I'm surprising Rich with spider socks, because I know that he'll like them, and they're in a green, and I know he likes green. So I do enjoy doing the surprise knitting, but I also really enjoy kind of consulting with my recipient, and I think that they enjoy getting to get a very personalized custom piece of knitwear. And that probably means that they wear it more because it's something that they've thought about and they know will work with their wardrobe. Oops. I think that those are my general thoughts on gift knitting. I have found that once I've started knitting gifts for someone for Christmas, it's hard to stop. So I try to keep my gift knitting list small. I actually, a month ago, was not planning to do much Christmas knitting this year because my knitting rate had really slowed down and I didn't want to stress myself out. But I've been knitting quite a bit, really like mid-October through now, and so I decided that I could go ahead and knit gifts for people this year. And so within like 3 days my knitting list expanded from 3 things to I think now I'm at 13. But it's all manageable based on my current schedule, and it's not something that I find stressful. I know that there are people who prefer to get all of their holiday knitting done throughout the year so that then they can just relax and enjoy holiday celebrations. For me, working on gift knitting during December really kind of helps put me in the holiday mood. And it also feels like a treat because I get to knit things that I don't knit a lot of in the rest of the year because I already have a lot of mittens or I already have a lot of hats. So yeah, it makes this time of year feel quite special, and I live up in the north, so this is definitely, the weather is making me feel like it's knitting time, and so it's just part of the celebration for me. But I don't think that you should ever have to gift knit out of obligation. I don't like the phrase selfish knitting. I only use the phrase personal knitting because I think it's ridiculous to label things that you make for yourself with your own hobby and your own skills and your own yarn as selfish. I don't like that binary at all. So if you need permission to not knit gifts for people because you don't want to, this is your permission. You don't have to. And yeah, so those are I guess, all of my thoughts. And you've seen about half of the finished objects, and I really hope that you enjoyed the episode. Let me know again about the lens. It seems to have worked out pretty well, and although I won't know for sure until I go into editing. I am also going to get back on the board game review wagon, and I'm going to record several of those as well. Oh, now that I talked about focus, there we go. So the next two that I plan to talk about are the Tea Dragon Society, which the cards are even cuter than that cover. This is a great game. I'm actually gifting this to my mom for Christmas because it's so adorable and it's so relaxing and I love it. So I'll be talking about that soon. And I'll also be talking about Onitama, which is, so Tea Dragon Society plays 2 to 4. And Onitama is a 2-player only game, and it takes the fun parts of chess, which I was skeptical because I don't like chess at all, but it makes it really fun, and it plays in like 10 to 30 minutes, which is really nice. So I love this one as well. So look for these reviews if you're interested in board games. Both of these, I would also say, are definitely good games for beginners and people who don't have a lot of experience with modern board games. Until next time, I've really enjoyed spending time with you, and I hope that you're enjoying your knitting. Bye!